Welcome to this Govn365 webinar with Fiona Michel on building emotionally intelligent executive teams and boards. As I said, if you've got any questions, just put them in the Q&A or the chat, preferably the Q&A. We'll keep an eye on that. And before we get started, I just wanted to share what Govn365 does. So our purpose is to amplify collective potential. And that's really ensuring that the executive team and board are aligned and focused on the areas that will deliver sustainable value for the organisation beyond just profit. We take a personal approach, plus we use software which is globally used. We firstly aim to get the whole team, the board and executive, to understand and align on the organisation's current state, where you are. Then we get you aligned on the key focus areas that will add the most value. And then we partner with you to help unlock that value through our coaching resources. So it goes beyond the boardroom and beyond a profit-only focus. One of the things we commonly uncover is blind spots, areas where you're not aware of. As an example, I asked a group of directors and executives recently, how aligned are you on the strategic priorities? And they all said very aligned. When I then asked them, each of them, to share with me the top 3 strategic priorities, I got about 30 different priorities. We then helped them, showed a mirror to them then and helped them align on the 2 or 3 areas that had the most value. One of the areas we help you understand is high performance governance as well as leadership. We know from Dr. Dennis Mowbray's research on the 3rd team that when the board and executive team are not aligned, the outcome for the organisation will be poorer. There's also a lot of research around emotional intelligent teams, building better trust, leading to higher productivity, innovation and better decision making. So Fiona Michel is a very experienced CEO and board director and is currently CEO of Braemar Hospital in the Waikato. She's won numerous awards in New Zealand and Australia for achievement in human resources, leadership, culture, ethics and industrial relations, and was a finalist in 2021 Westpac Women of Influence Awards for her work on the COVID-19 vaccination program. Welcome, Fiona. Fantastic to have you on the webinar.
Thank you.
So, Fiona, from your vast experience working with many different teams in different industries, when we talk about emotional intelligence on a team, how do you go about firstly understanding where the team's at? And then I'd come on to secondly, how do you start building it?
So I think there's a couple of things at play at the beginning. The first is you have to know where your own emotional intelligence is if you've got any hope of noticing what the team environment is like. So, understanding your own personal place and what you're good at and what you notice and what you don't notice is somewhere to spend some time and spend some effort. A lot of the online tests that you can do or tools that you can do to sort of establish if you're an emotionally intelligent person, it relies on your own sense of self. So I come back to actually the point you've just made, where, if you're not very emotionally intelligent, you could easily answer a survey that says you are very emotionally intelligent because that's your sense of self. So it's always good if you're really keen to understand yourself to do a proper performance test. And there's only a few emotional intelligence tests that really meet that mark. The Mesquite is one, which is the Mayer-Salovey-Caruso emotional intelligence test, but I just call it the Mesquite. And spending some time understanding yourself is a really, really good start. Then when you have got a level of confidence that you'll notice things, then it is a matter of doing your due diligence around the team or the board that you're joining. There's a hell of a lot of opportunity to ask naive questions when you're new. You get away with that for about the first 6 months. So it's a brilliant time to have lots of curious questions and not the sort of probing, why do you do this? Because that can be a bit confronting for people, especially if there is an issue. But you can ask questions like, I noticed this happened. Can you tell me a bit more about what that's about? And that gives people a bit of license to explore, explain background or where people are coming from. When I'm personally going into a new team, I make a real effort to meet people at all levels of the business, even when I'm in a board situation. And particularly, it's useful to touch base with people who have left your organisation relatively recently, because they will often have a bit of an unbridled perspective that you might not get from the current cohort of of staff. So, so get to know yourself a bit, do some observation, ask curious questions, and really make sure that you're not just listening to the people who immediately have your ear, but you go hunting for the people who may have a different perspective.
Okay. And you talked about people who have left the organisation. I've talked to a few people who they say, "Oh, I'm not sure the value of you know, exit interviews," or talk to people who have left. You know, what's your view on that? Is it how that's done, as opposed to, you know, some people are doing it as ticking the box? Where
Oh, look, absolutely. I mean, exit interviews will often give you some data, but again, people often don't want to burn their bridges when they leave, and so it can still be a relatively modified view of their real experience. My view is that they're much better to talk to 3 months or 6 months after they've gone from the organisation, because at that point they've firmly entrenched themselves into their next role. They're not feeling vulnerable. What if they've made a mistake? So they'll often be a lot more candid with you that far down the track than sort of ticking the proverbial box on the week that they're leaving. Also, you can find that people who are leaving under a sense of pain will just respond with that pain when they depart. Whereas if you give it a couple of months, sometimes what you'll get is a little bit more of a balanced view when they've had time to kind of recover from some of that challenge. But it's incredibly important. I think equally important are stay interviews. So we talk about exit interviews, but we should be also talking about stay interviews. Why do people stay with us? Why are they not going elsewhere? Are they thinking about that? So organisations that just do exit interviews and then an engagement survey every couple of years are really not going to be on the pulse of where their organisation is at.
yeah, and I know also organisations might do regular engagement surveys. Is your view? You talk about going through the organisation, which is something I always love to do, checking in with the front line and all the way through to give you some signals. But is it that mix of you and the leadership team getting that insights from people one-on-one, or is the engagement survey going to give you enough? You know, what's your way of actually getting that sense?
Yeah, the engagement survey will never give you enough. So if that's what people rely on, you will not understand your organisation. So it's a real mixture of touch points that you have to have, and many of them need to be informal. It's been one of the challenges, I think, as we've moved to a larger work from home culture. Part of the challenge of that is you don't have those bump moments where I bump into you at the coffee shop, or I bump into you at the photocopier and have a quick chat. And so thinking about, well, how might I engineer some bump moments so that I can just check in and see how things go. So I have a really simple one at the hospital, for example, because incredibly difficult to get my workforce together from a whole range of perspectives. So once every couple of weeks, I take an enormous basket of chocolate around the hospital. It's a great bribery tool. People flock to me, and when I'm offering that, but I'm also checking in when I do that, and I ask people about their week, and I ask them, are they okay, and I ask them, you know, what's on their mind, and that gives me just little moments of what's on top for people in that kind of context. Equally, twice a year, one of the practices we do here, and I've done with other organisations, is what we call a two-up meeting, where I meet with my direct reports without, you know, my team being present. And that's a really useful way to get really good feedback on how my direct reports leadership is coming across. We have a very standard model for how we run that. So it's a half-hour meeting. It's all of my direct reports team together. So I'm not meeting with people one-on-one. And that has its limitations, and we acknowledge that. And I asked two questions. You know, what did Gerry do really well in the past 6 months that you would really acknowledge him for? And what would you like to see Gerry working on in the next 6 months? And in doing that, allows for some recognition, because I see my direct reports operating in a particular way and in particular meetings. This gives the emperor's new clothes thing, where some of the stuff that might not be so obvious to me or to my direct report starts to emerge. And what I would say with the 2-up meetings is they're completely useless to you for at least a year. You need to have done them consistently and without any kind of negative outcome for over a year. And then all of a sudden, the next time round, people share a bit more. And the next time round, they're telling you even more again. And they're dropping into your office to say, hey, I didn't raise this thing in the 2-up, but I just want to share a bit more again, because they can see that the purpose of those interactions are support, coaching, improvement, not telling people off, not bad things happening. And when you can create that level of trust with your workforce where they're used to seeing you, you're not an enigma, you're not a scary senior manager, you've shown up with chocolate, and then you talk to them at least twice a year about how they're feeling, then there's a lot of content and value that comes from that. And there's things you can do beyond that, but those are just two simple examples.
Yeah, no, they're great examples. I love them. And so that I just touch on that trust. So because obviously the psychological safety, when you, as a leader in the organization, you've got, even though whether you like it or not, people, there's a barrier between you and 2 down. So how do you give people the comfort to be able to say, be open with you, and trust you? What do you do to build trust other than bribe them with chocolate? So,
so I do a couple of things. The first is, again, I start with me. So I try really hard to be radically transparent. There's not much people don't know about me in this hospital, everything down to my dog's name and all the things that go on with that. It's one of those things where people will mirror you to some extent. So start with yourself, be somebody that they feel they know, be vulnerable, take those opportunities to share who you are and what you find easy and what you find difficult and where you need help, so that people have got a sense that you're a normal, regular human being. And then what I also look for are the proverbial quick wins. So here at Braemar, I'll give you an example. I had been in the organisation just a couple of weeks, and I had done some get to know me meetings, and I was trying to establish kind of what are people really thinking about here, what's annoying them, what's important to them, what's really important that they want to protect and preserve versus those things they'd really like to see changed. And simplistically, the thing that kept coming up was the fact that people were really concerned about the fact that they, at nighttime, obviously we're a 24/7 business, they had to walk out of the hospital, walk round State Highway 1 to get to their vehicles in a staff car park. And I kind of had this blinding flash of the obvious moment, which is, we have a fence at the back of the hospital. How hard would it be to put a gate in the fence, which would mean they don't have to leave the campus, they can just walk straight through. And I kind of said that. I said, why are we not putting a fence in? Everyone went, oh, don't talk about the fence. We've asked about the gate, we've asked about having a gate for years, and there's 100 reasons why a gate would be a problem. And so I talked to my facilities manager and said, can we just get a gate in there? It's not going to cost us much. Can we just do that? And I didn't do that with particular intent other than to solve the problem, which was stop people walking down State Highway 1 in the middle of the night, please. And we put the gate in, didn't herald it. It was there kind of the next Monday. Well, I could not have underestimated the wildfire with which that went round the hospital. People felt heard because we put the gate in that they'd been asking for years. Low cost, no big impact, other than the fact that people felt heard. Yeah. And what I would say to people is find that 1 or 2 things, and not everything's a simple fix, and I get that, my gate was easy. Not every issue is easy, but there will be some easy issues that you just have to make a decision on. And then when people feel heard, people open up more because it's worth their time if they think that something might change. So, you know, that should be the thing that people are looking for coming in new to any environment is what are those one or two things that are important to the main people that are going to be keeping your business alive.
That's great. So if I go back to when you first become aware of emotional intelligence, where did it start for you? What was the light bulb moment, if there was a light bulb moment?
Well, I think I didn't call it emotional intelligence for a whole long time because I've had kind of three careers. I started off in IT actually, fell into IT, which ultimately, because I've clearly got a mouth, I ended up doing training and change management because that was something that rocked my socks much more than the technical side did. And then that took me into banking, and then banking took me into HR. And I think right back at the IT end of things, I was doing that in the early 1990s when people were first getting PCs on their desks and first using, a mouse. And I worked with all these people that were incredibly skilled accountants in their business, used to using calculators and used to using ledgers. And now they were having to use this thing called Excel, and they didn't know what that was, and they were terrified, absolutely terrified of what if I'm no good in this new world. And let's look at where we are now. Today, we're all starting to look at AI, and we're all going, oh, do I really need to know that? Is that something that's important? And right back in those days, I would kind of see that fear and realize that to get to the point where I could help somebody learn and take on that role and get confident and use their technology appropriately, I had to first get through their fear and give them confidence that this was something that they were still a great accountant, they were going to master this, and it was just taking people on that journey. So way back then, I would have said, I wouldn't have used the language, but I could see that element of it. And today we talk about fear very little in the workplace, but it is still a very dominant thing that that we struggle with. And I look at a lot of what we do in business, and there are just bucket loads of elephants in the room that we ignore to our peril.
Yeah. And as you've journeyed through different teams over time, have you got an example of where you've come onto a team as the leader or even as a participant where the emotional intelligence is low and, you'd struggle with that?
Yes, absolutely. I've made some absolute shocker decisions in my own career about roles that I've taken on where I really didn't do my due diligence well, or I thought I had, and then realized once I got in there that I was listening to the words people were saying and I wasn't really reading the room appropriately. So I'd get in there and go, oh, this is not what I thought it was going to be. And I think when those sorts of things happen, you've got to assess really quickly, is this a team just on a journey and now you're part of that journey and you can help reset where that team's going? Or is this a team that has no interest in that journey and you are the outlier with a desire to have a psychologically safe or emotionally intelligent environment to work within? And if the answer to that is that's the case, then you really have to fail fast. And in my mind, we don't often talk about that. We don't often say, I get into a job and it's wrong for me, or it's not the team I thought it was. How do I get out of this team fast? And that's, to me, a viable option if you don't feel that you've got the ability to influence the change that's needed to take the organisation forward. Worse, I think, if you just stick with it and hope for the best, you can become part of that problem. And then you are in effect enabling it because you're not moving it forward. And that's something that's occurred to me more than once. I can think very clearly of two roles in my life where I should have seen it earlier and I should have called it earlier. But you sometimes go in with a bit of, well, I certainly go in sometimes with a Pollyanna view that I can make a difference, and because we're all in there to make a difference. But a very wise person once said to me that every role that you go into, you should plan your exit in line with your orientation. So as soon as you're planning your orientation in, you should also be planning your exit out. Not because you're planning to leave early, but because you want to know when it is time to go, you're going on your terms. And you might have not negotiables that you say, if this happens in this team, I'm out. These are the things I need to set up before I'm out. And I find people like CFOs do that really well, because they come in and I watch them, and if they lift up the lid and bad things scuttle out from underneath, you watch CFOs disappear really fast in a business that's not what they thought it was going to be, because they don't want to have to own the financial monkey on the back that they've inherited. Why don't we do that more from a people point of view, that if the behaviour isn't going to be okay, that you vote with your feet? Yeah,
and it is. I can relate to that. Situation of a team where you come in and you're optimistic and you maybe don't make the call, and it does requires a bit of honesty with yourself and b, a bit of bravery to make that call. So that's probably why it's harder to make the decision. I've got a question relating back to the 2-up meeting. So this is from Anna. Thanks for sharing the 2-up meeting idea with the CEO / chocolate examples. Have you experienced the 2-up meeting feedback loop process in a governance context, e.g. regular opportunity for board members or executive and governance committee members to speak or meet informally with the CEO's direct reports? So rather than the executive example.
Yeah, I have, as an executive actually, rather than as a director. I was working in Australia for a large multinational, and the group chair used to meet with me every quarter, and he would ask me to be frank and open about absolutely everything I was seeing. And this comes back a bit to my radical transparency. I would tell him everything, every piece of gossip, everything that I was hearing about how the exec team was leading, because I trusted him and I trusted that he would use it in the right way to help coach and support and progress those people. I've also been in environments where that trust was not there, and the leaders were looking for feedback to, as ammunition to remove somebody. And I think you have to be incredibly careful in those situations, because it's very easy to find yourself in a place where you need your job, so you kind of go with the flow, and then all of a sudden you're enabling something that you don't believe in or that you think's the wrong thing to do. So I have been in environments where that kind of methodology was used under the auspices of, hey, we're doing it for all the right reasons. But the minute I could see it wasn't for that, I would personally push back on that. Now, I would say I'd push back on that. I was older, I was wiser, I'll live without their job if that was going to cause me a problem. There are people in our businesses that can't be that, c'est la vie about it. They need the jobs. And that's when psychological safety really falls apart. So the simple answer is yes, that 2-up idea works in a board setting as well, if the right platform is put in place so that the directors are not a mystery to the senior managers that they're talking to, or to the leaders that they're talking to, and again where the ground rules are put in place so that it's used for the right reasons.
Yeah, great question, Anna. Linking to that psychological safety, I know there's I don't know if you've seen the work of Amy Edmondson, so she's got 7 questions that people can answer, or teams can. Have you ever used that in teams or boards in terms of to establish what the psychological safety is like in the team, or how do you judge it?
No, to be fair, I haven't. I've met Amy a couple of times happily in different environments, but I've never used her structure in a formal setting in that respect. what I've tended to do is use a very simple relationship meeting approach, which is more, in my experience, it's the getting people around together and talking about what is it that I need to be really great at my job. What will you see when I'm not in a good space? How do you deal with me when you've got something that you need to talk to me about that you might think is a bit uncomfortable? So that we kind of set up all the ground rules together of how we each work and operate. And the great thing is when you do that, then down the track, if I've said to people, hey, if I'm causing a problem, I need you to tell me that it's time to go for a walk, and we go for a walk around the block, and you just tell me how it is. And then in 6 months' time, if that scenario comes up, you've got a beautiful reason to go, hey, Fiona, you remember when you said that you wanted to go for a walk around the block when we have something to say? We need to go for a walk around the block. And the nice thing is I've set the tone. I've explained what I need. So it's not as confronting for me because I've kind of got a little bit of power in the process. But equally, you've got a pathway to address something that's a bit uncomfy with me. And if we can do that as a whole board or do that as an executive team, and again, I've used those in both of those settings, then we've kind of created the ground rules of how we'll operate. And by definition, that creates a level of psychological safety because we've got a platform on which to talk. So incredibly useful to call on formats like Amy's format if you're new to it. But if you can or want to keep it a little bit more low key, then it can be developing some really good relationship type questions. And in the best settings that I've been in, we come back to those every year. So we engage every year. We talked last year, this is what you needed, this is what was important to you. We're a year on, has anything changed? Would you like to, anything to be different? How's it worked for you this year? Are we okay? All of those things are good. And I've found that we can introduce those kinds of things even when teams have been together for decades. It doesn't have to be a brand new team. It can be a team that's been together for a really long time, and we can say, okay, we'd like to kind of check in on these ground rules so that we're even better next year. Is everybody up for that? And generally, I find the answer is yes.
Yeah. Can I just capture those questions again? What do you need from me? What was the key ones you had?
What did I just say? It is things like, here are my strengths. Here is the things I really struggle with. Here's what you'll see when I'm not okay. Here's how to approach me when I'm not okay. Here's how to approach me when you're not okay and you've got something that you need to deal with me. So there's those are just kind of off the top of my head, but they're kind of indicative of the kinds of conversations that we have. And it's, when you start to separate the what and the how, that's when you get the power, because, a board will often come together. Here's the agenda. It's all content from management. It's all about the things. It's all about the what. But, it is important that whether you're an executive team or a board, you do stop and check in on how we're going to be, who we're going to be. When somebody comes to present to us at our meeting, who are we going to be? Are we going to be the people that leaps down their throat, that questions them, that tries to show them what parts of their paper is wrong? Or are we going to be the people who listen and who see the intent? And if there's some feedback to give, if it's not quite what we wanted to see, how are we going to deal with that so that we're not an environment that's scary to come to because we annihilate people who come to give us bad news or come to give us something that we don't want to see. Yeah. So, but we can't do that in the moment. We have to have done that ahead of time to plan who we are and how we're going to be before we end up having to deliver that kind of choices and behaviours in the meetings themselves.
Okay, yeah. And so talking about boards, obviously as an executive team, you've got much more time with your team to establish trust, build relationships. Boards maybe only meet 6, 8 times a year.
Yeah.
when you're on a board and there's, the meetings are full, I hear this a lot. How do you build that psychological safety, that trust, when you don't have that much time? What's your view in that situation?
Well, you're absolutely right. It is more limited, and yet it's more critical, because at least in an executive team, you can have different points of view and different outcomes, whereas a board ultimately should be coming to a point of joint agreement on decisions that you make. So, I would always advocate for putting aside dedicated time, like you would normally do a strategy session once a year. I would look to do a team session once a year as well. You can build it onto your strategy day, so that you start with the who and spend some time on that. Perhaps, in the afternoon, the day before, have a great dinner together so that you have some social time, and then do the mahi around the strategy the next day. That's not usually too much time to ask of a board, especially professional boards. But what we've also done in boards that I'm both sitting on as a director, but also my board here at the hospital, is we build it into the agenda as well. So we have check-ins in the agenda, so that we check in on how people are. We start the meeting a little bit early with a little bit of social time, and then we get into the agenda. And you can do a last thoughts, last questions. Things that actually become standing agenda items, so that people get used to that flow of something short and simple in the meeting itself. But again, it's useful when you've had that time built onto your strategy day to think about the who, not just the what. I'd also strongly encourage just, social connection in between meetings, whether that's a one-on-one coffee with directors through the year, or whether that's, the odd board dinner or whatever. And the board dinners can be really useful, because what you can do is you can invite, a handful of key talent from different levels of the organisation, so that you can see who the succession plans are. So you can make it work as well as play. You can use it to get to know the prospective executives of the future in your team, and that's a great chance for them to tell you what's on top and what's going on in the business that maybe you're not hearing from the top level of executive who are presenting to you and trying to show you a good shiny story.
Yeah, okay, sounds good. And have you had to deal with a chair, or have you got any stories about a chair who lacks emotional intelligence, or a group of people on a board who lack emotional intelligence?
Yes, to be fair, I've not had too many personal problems in the board, but I have joined organisations where there have been terrible problems with the board, and look, again, there's the only way through that, if a direct pathway is not an option, is to think about who influences that chair. So ultimately, that chair is either going to be influenced by another member of the board, or if not, they'll be influenced by their shareholder, because that's why they're there.
Yeah. And
finding a way to get that feedback to the shareholders can be an important next step. And I have seen some chairs exited when the shareholders had enough concern coming through different parts of their organisation to kind of warrant it. It's one of the reasons why doing a board review on a regular basis is important, or having some other form of feedback that can come through. I have, though, also been in environments where people have let it all hang out in a board review, and then that's presented by the not emotionally intelligent chair, who sits there and says, oh yes, apparently I'm this, and then everyone around the room goes, oh, I didn't say that, and then you've got to kind of go, actually, the only people who answered the questions were the people at this table. So you've got to call that behaviour. But again, if you've done the work of getting the team to have an agreed platform for how you're going to deliver challenging messages, at least it's a little bit easier to kind of step in there when something happens, whether that's at an executive level or at a board level. But always I'd start from that place of who has the ear of this director or this chair that's kind of not in the right place, and how can you give them good, useful, objective information about the impact that they're having. And, you know, as I said earlier, it helps if you can, you know, live without the job if it really turned pear-shaped, because there is risk that comes with that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so if you go onto a board, let's say, or your own team, what's, in terms of the standards that you hold each other accountable to, because this is probably some of the things you're talking about, is that something you would expect to cover off the induction? If it hasn't been discussed, how do you approach that conversation around expectations of the team or the board in terms of behaviour?
Yeah, so if something exists, you know, if you've got kind of a rules of engagement that perhaps have been developed at previous times, then any time that somebody new joins, to me, you have to reevaluate, is that still okay? So just because I'm new doesn't mean I'm obliged to adopt the model that's in place. It's an opportunity for a conversation to say, is this the model that works for us now? We've got a new person on the team. How does the team need to reinvent that? Does it need reinventing, or is it actually exactly what everybody would sign up to? But it's really useful for a new person to see or hear examples. So again, great agenda item for the first meeting. Let's talk about our rules of engagement. Let's tell you examples in the last year of when we've deployed those, and when it's worked for us and when it hasn't worked for us, so that you, the new person, kind of get your head around how does it work here. There's a lot of observation that's important here, and again, if I go back to, I made that comment before about the emperor's new clothes. You know, I can see a lot of people who have beautiful posters on the wall, and they tell you all the things that are what the organisation's all about. But the minute you actually get out with the real folk, they tell you that stuff doesn't exist, and there are other priorities that are more important to the organisation than the ones that are being espoused. So that's, again, when you've got to be curious and ask the question, oh, I heard this is really important, or this is something that seems to keep coming up. Where does that fit in our rules of engagement? And ask those curious questions to kind of get people to reflect, or if necessary, see the disconnect between those two things.
We've got another question here. If you're on a board and would like to get info or feedback from people in the organisation, what are the protocols around approaching staff? Do you talk to the chair first or the GM? So what's the approach?
Yeah, I mean, different people have different ways of working. I've been in some organisations where the board wasn't allowed to talk to staff at all, which I think is fundamentally wrong. How can they govern a business that they're not allowed to get into? But equally, there is a courtesy that says, you know, you don't spend all your time, you know, talking to staff without being transparent with senior management about your plans. So in my experience, it would be something you discuss as a board. That's again a good thing to talk about as part of that relationship meeting. How do we, if I want to go and see, or I want to go and do a health and safety walk, or I want to go and get some feedback on what people think about me, build that into that. How will we do that? What's the right thing to do? So that it's no surprise down the track when you say, hey, I'm going to make that time now. It would be good if we can do it in this way. But typically, in my experience, you make that request, you advise the chair, you make that request of the CEO to let them know you'd like to do that. And then in most cases, in my experience, that's you know, that's no issue. People just don't like surprises. People don't like to hear that you've had a coffee catch up with somebody that you had no idea, or they had no idea you were doing. And sometimes it's important to be aware that you think you're getting feedback from somebody who's down in the weeds, who will know what's going on. But there could be a whole lot of baggage with that person that you aren't aware of, that if you go in and think you've learned something new, you're outside of that context. So it is important that you get at least some transparency with the CEO. If you've got a problem with your CEO, if you've got a problem with your management team, different scenario. You've got to take as equally their feedback with a grain of salt, because they've got they've got reputations to protect, and they might be trying to steer you in the direction of certain people, and you need to have the license to be able to go and see whoever you like. So yeah, think about building it into the relationship meeting. Definitely talk about it as a board, and get your CEO on board for those connection points.
Yeah, and if you're on the exec, speaking to your staff is setting them up so that they don't feel what do the board want, so that they understand the purpose of the conversation.
Absolutely, and again, that's why things like inviting the up and comers to come to a board dinner is a really useful thing, because they start to see the board as normal people in a different way, and that's half the battle. We have great images of people in senior roles and hierarchical positions. They can do no wrong. They're in big senior roles because they're obviously very clever, smart, wonderful people, when actually most of the time they're terribly fallible people who have achieved certain amounts in their career, but it doesn't make them perfect. And I observe boards often where we go out and we look for a lawyer, or we look for an accountant, or we look for somebody with digital experience. All of those things, you look for the average ad for a new director. We're looking for lawyers, accountants, and digital people. But when do we look for the people? Well, we don't often, because what we do is we assume we're good at that. We assume we know what that. We don't need a specialist at the table for that. And yet, just about every business failure that you've ever unpicked, a big chunk of what's made that business fail is culture, and a big chunk of the problem is the people. But what we did was we hired the lawyer and the accountant and the digital person to help govern the business, because we're all experts in people. So obviously.
So what you're saying is, really, when you're thinking about a skills matrix, you should be actually thinking some of the behavioural elements of a person, not just the functional and technical elements.
Yeah, and how do you assess that, given that when you've got a purportedly successful person sitting in front of you who've had a positive business outcome, do we really know how that business ran? Is the business did it run through an iron fist? So yes, of course they got great outcomes for a few years, but if they'd been still in that business, would it have fallen over because they hadn't run it in a way that was sustainable? So there's a lot to think through in that kind of context.
Yeah, we've got probably one last question, and then I'll start to wrap it up. So this is a sort of quite an open question here. Any quick tips for helping boards work together collaboratively when they seem to have very differing opinions and struggle to work together?
Look, you can only go back to scratch if they're willing to do so. And if they're not willing to do so, you've got to, I go back to my earlier comment of deciding whether it's worth banging your head against the wall for too long. If they're willing to do so, then setting up all the things we've talked about already is useful, but also having some fun things that allow it not to be too stressful and so on. So, for example, we have, in some settings that I've been in, we've had, code words. So when people are behaving not okay, everybody around the table's got the right to use the code word. Was pineapple in the case that I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
And if somebody says pineapple, everybody stops and they suddenly go, oh, yes, okay, we're in that zone. And that's a way to kind of break the ice and allow people that chance to take a breath and think, okay, what have we decided we're going to be? Who have we decided we're going to be? Right, what do we have to do to kind of back up on this? And that requires sometimes harsh and hard conversations. Sometimes the chair, if they've got the gumption, have to take the directors out and say, you can't keep behaving in this way. And How do we put a plan in place to help you on that? How do we coach you? How do we give you the feedback? So you're still participating, but you're actively working on it. And as I said before, if the chair's the problem, well, that's a different kettle of fish.
Yeah, it sounds like my experience in this area is if people aren't listening to others, then that's a problem. So that's a behavioural problem the chair or the CEO needs to address.
But the challenge of that is that the data says that 65% of adults never develop to the point of being a high functioning adult.
Yeah.
So if you read the work of Robert Keegan, who does a lot of work in adult development, 65% of us are just never going to be that insightful. So in effect, you've got to battle the fact that sometimes it's not I'm choosing not to, it's I cannot because I don't have the skill. And that's then a different type of solution that you've got to look for.
Yeah. And the other one is I'm a bit of an advert for our next webinar at the end of September, Diversity of Thought. One of the elements is around just the framework you look at solving problems. So a lot of it, lead boards and executive teams come from outcomes and evidence, and they focus on that, whereas there's other lenses around people, around risk, around different areas that they can solve the problem. And it's similar to probably I've used Edward de Bono's 6 thinking hats. So everyone think about the black hat, what can go wrong here? What's the downside? So forcing people to take a position that they might not naturally take.
Yeah,
so that's
I often say to people, if we were only thinking about evidence and outcomes, then we would use all functions on our dishwasher because they all are sensible, smart, useful things. The reality is we use the one that we're comfortable with and that's easy because behaviorally it's convenient. Yeah. So we do have to factor in behavior into and alongside evidence and outcomes.
Yeah, that's brilliant. All right, well, what I've got from this, I've made a few notes. So I love the idea of, firstly, emotional intelligence is know yourself. So that's really important. If you don't know where you're at, then it's very difficult to manage a team or lead a team in that area. And so you mentioned the Mosquito test as one of the best ones. I'll see if I can put a link to that. The other thing is just the curious questions you talked about. I noticed that not telling people what to do. So thinking about the types of questions you ask, and also that it's going to take time for people to build trust with you. So don't expect people to tell you everything on day one or month one. It's 3 to 6 months before you can do that. I love the 2 up, or some people call it 2 down, whatever you want to call it, in terms of meeting reports of reports. Something I used to do, have cups of tea with people. I didn't use chocolate because I worked for Mars and Cadbury, so that wasn't really going to sway people. I think that is a fantastic practice, and I really like that, whether it's a board or whether it's an executive team. The psychological safety, and whether you go the formal route, I really like your approach to just asking some of those questions. And I think what you've shown here is the authenticity of your leadership. So that just, without you saying that, it comes across. Here's when I'm not having a good day, here's what you'll see. So they're the things that that's really saying I do have a bad day. I'm not perfect all the time. So I think that's really important to build trust. I like I've noted down, plan your exit with your orientation. That's a great little one-liner. I think the setting up the ground rules is really critical, whether it's an exec team or board. If you don't have those ground rules, you're going to be going all over the place, and it's very difficult to hold each other accountable unless you've got that. And then that board setting aside time for building trust, and social side. So corporate boards have got more time to do that. If you're on a charity, that's even harder, but it's critical. So I think it's, whether it's, and I really like the fact of putting it on the agenda, because having it once a year or a dinner where not everyone turns up, if it's on the agenda and it's a little and often, I think that's a really, really great way to do it. And then thinking about who influences who on the board. So some really great takeouts there. So thank you, Fiona, for your time and expertise and insights. It's been fantastic. And if anyone wants to know more about Govn365 and how we can help you unlock your potential as an organisation, then contact me. Other than that, our next webinar is at the end of September, and we've got someone who Fiona knows well, so Dr. Juliet Burke, who's works in Australia and university. She's done some research around diversity of thought. So I'm just about 3/4 of the way through her book at the moment, which is fascinating. So we'll be interviewing her at the end of September, and then Mike Bennett's at the end of October. So that's it from me. What else? Yeah, feedback, good questions, great insights. Thank you. So Ben, thank you for everyone for being here. Thank you, Fiona. Really appreciate it. See you, everyone.